Hello, I'm Catherine Gilbert from Newcastle University in the UK, and my paper is going to address Rwandan remembrance in Belgium and France. 27 years have passed since the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, and during that time a significant Rwandan diaspora has become established across Europe. For the purposes of this paper, I will focus on the forms of memorialisation that have emerged among Rwandan communities in Belgium and France, drawing particular attention to the use of public space in remembrance practices. As well as large public events such as annual remembrance walks and commemoration ceremonies that raise awareness of the Rwandan presence in Belgium and France, a number of monuments to the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi have been erected at key public sites in both countries in recent years, particularly in Brussels and Paris. So I want to think about what it means for the Rwandan community to claim a public space for memorialisation in the heart of these two former colonial powers, and what challenges this memorialisation poses to dominant understandings of post-colonial history in Belgium and France. I should mention that this is part of a larger project, Genocide Commemoration and Education in the Rwandan Diaspora, which examines the impact of place and displacement on commemorative practices within diasporic communities, as well as investigating the transmission of memory through education. So I'm exploring the initiatives and activities of Rwandan community organisations that are aimed at helping teachers and educators to address the subject of the genocide in their classrooms. So I want to suggest that these commemorative and educational activities contribute towards the broader project of decolonising collective memory in these countries, and that Rwandan diasporic communities are actively seeking the recognition and integration of the Rwandan narrative into European collective memory. In so doing, they are complicating the received understanding of lieu de mémoire and shedding light on the multiple entanglements of post-colonial collective memory and history, as well as the ongoing practices of colonial amnesia and nostalgia that are still very much operational in Belgium and French national memory. So I'll focus primarily on the activities which take place during the official commemorative period known as Kwibuka, which marks the 100 days of the genocide and runs from the 7th of April till the 4th of July. The 4th of July itself is known as Kwibohora, or Liberation Day. And I will also discuss the monuments that have been inaugurated in recent years, all of which are intended to increase visibility of the Rwandan communities and Rwandan history in their respective host countries. But before I come to these examples, I want to say a few words about the cultural memory studies framework within which my work is situated. Memory studies as a field certainly owes a debt of gratitude to Pierre Nora's monumental Lieu de Mémoire project, which charted sites of French national memory. According to Nora, sites of memory are characterised as les lieux où se cristallise et se réfugie la mémoire, and can therefore include geographical locations, buildings, monuments, historical persons, memorial days or symbolic actions, among other things. So in other words, these are sites which trigger a particularly emotive form of remembering the past. It's not my goal here to engage in a critique of Nora's work. Suffice to say that many scholars have already pointed to shortcomings in Nora's work, not least his construct of a fragmented nation mémoire, which ignores the polyphony of the French colonies as well as the memory cultures of immigrant communities in France. There has been a notable shift then in focus to examine sites of memory from post-colonial, multicultural, diasporic, transnational and transcultural perspectives. Indeed, for example, Astrid Earle calls for even greater sensitivity towards the complex inter-, multi- and transcultural constellations of memory sites, while Anne Rigney offers a notable attempt to rethink the conception of the lieu de mémoire in her work on the emergence and life of memory sites. So Rigney understands the lieu de mémoire not as a stable entity, but as fundamentally a mnemonic process in which sites of memory are constantly being reinvested with new meaning, emphasising a shift from sites to dynamics within memory studies. And this notion of dynamics is particularly pertinent for my own work, where I'm looking at sites where different histories and memories potentially enter into dialogue and push us to rethink our understanding of post-colonial collective memory and agency. I draw in particular on Susanna Radstone's conceptualisation of the locatedness of memory. As Radstone observes, memory work is always a deeply located practice, and she reminds us that As the emphasis on transnational and transcultural memory strengthens, it becomes all the more vital to remember and pay attention to the locatedness of instances of transmission. This is particularly relevant to the diasporic context, as we need to bear in mind that Rwandans in the diaspora are mediating between the location of their traumatic experience, the site of genocide, and the location in which their act of remembrance is taking place. So they're simultaneously distanced from the sites of memory in Rwanda, all while trying to forge new transcultural sites of memory in the diaspora. So working with instances of remembrance and commemoration in this context then, we need to pay attention to the social, political and cultural locatedness of the community and the conditions within which the acts of remembrance take place in order to build, again in Radstone's words, an understanding of memory as the living or the life of the past in the present. Indeed, Radstone underlines the continuing significance of location for the meaning-making and effective dimensions of life in the present. So turning then to the commemoration and memorialisation in the Rwandan diaspora, most of my examples are taken from the 25th anniversary of the genocide against the Tutsi in 2019. This landmark anniversary year saw a large number of commemorative events across Belgium and France, as well as numerous conferences, cultural and public events organised around the commemorative period, including theatre performances, exhibitions, book launches, and so on. As you can see from the slide, there were 8 commemorative events across Belgium, all of which took place within the French-speaking region, with the exception of Antwerp, and there was a further commemoration in Luxembourg. And there were 5 commemorative events held in France. And then on the 4th of July, there's the Journée de Libération, or the Kwibohora, which is a much more celebratory event that takes place on the 4th of July and marks the end of the genocide. The official commemoration takes place on the 7th of April, organised by the Rwandan embassies in the respective countries. And there are then other events organised by genocide survivor organisations. In Belgium, this is Ibuka Mémoire et Justice, and they have a sister organisation, Ibuka France, that is responsible for the commemorative activities in France. And these include walks for remembrance, survivor gatherings and vigils, and of course commemoration ceremonies. The ceremonies themselves include survivor testimony, as well as speeches from political figures and community leaders, candle lighting, a minute of silence, wreath laying, song and poetry, which is often performed by youth members. And it's important to note that the Belgian events all include a walk of remembrance preceding the commemoration ceremonies, although this isn't always the case in France or indeed elsewhere. During the commemoration in Liège, for example, the streets were actually closed off by police escort, and the local Marine marching band led the procession of 2 kilometres, playing very lively music that was actually quite jarring with the sombre tone of the event itself. But I think this raises fascinating questions around visibility and the occupying of outdoor public spaces, and tying into existing memorial practices that already take place in Europe and elsewhere. A notable use of public space includes the photography exhibition, which was held in a very prominent position on the grille of the Hôtel de Ville in the centre of Paris, although this was only displayed for a couple of weeks in April of 2019. But the opening of this exhibition included politicians, local authorities, and well-known celebrities such as the French-Rwandan singer, songwriter and author Gaël Faye. Similarly, in Brussels in 2019, the Homme Debout exhibition was exhibited, and this is a project by artist Bruce Clark, which was originally shown in different cities in Belgium and across Rwanda in 2014. So here we have a really interesting recycling of materials in milestone anniversary years. A further example is the decoration of the Mannequin Peace statue in central Brussels in Rwandan national dress on the occasion of Kwibohora, on Liberation Day on the 4th of July. And as I said, this was a much more celebratory event. And then, of course, we have the memorials, which constitute a much more traditional site of memory. The oldest, I believe, is the commemorative monument in Brussels near the Rwandan embassy in Woluwe-Saint-Pierre, which was inaugurated in 2004 to mark the 10th anniversary of the genocide against the Tutsi. And this is now where the official ceremony takes place on the 7th of April each year. Over a decade later, a memorial was inaugurated in Charleroi in 2017, and this is a particularly interesting example as the text on the memorial stone draws attention both to the victims of the genocide and to the 10 Belgian peacekeepers who were executed on the first day of the genocide in April 1994. Now, putting these victims in parallel is problematic, as it was the death of these peacekeepers that prompted the UN to withdraw the bulk of its UNAMIR forces in 1994, a decision that enabled the genocidal slaughter to continue unimpeded. So this in itself draws attention to the problematic relationship between Rwanda and its former colonial ruler. And then most recently, there was the inauguration of a stele commémorative in Mons in Belgium in April of this year, although sadly very few people were able to attend due to COVID restrictions. And this stele has been erected in the Place du Parc, which was already a memorial site for the First and Second World Wars. So here we see a sort of tapping into existing public memorial space. According to local media, this event highlighted the lien privilégié qui existe entre la République du Rwanda et la Belgique, où chaque année la communauté rwandaise se réunit pour commémorer cet événement. So here Belgium is identified as a key site for Rwandan commemoration. The memorial offers a place for the Rwandan community to gather together and remember, and also enables the transmission of the memory of the genocide. So it's a symbolic recognition on the part of Belgium of what happened in Rwanda, as well as a way of fighting against genocide denial and revisionism. In France, there's a stele commémorative that was erected in the Père-Lachaise cemetery in Paris in 2014 to mark the 20th anniversary of the genocide. And of course, this cemetery is in itself an iconic lieu de mémoire. And as far as I'm aware, there are also stèles commémoratives in Toulouse, Dieu-le-Fit and Cluny. And finally, there's the Jardin de la Mémoire du Génocide des Tutsis, which is located in the Parc de Choisy in the 13e arrondissement in Paris. This memory garden was inaugurated in 2016 and is now where the official commemoration ceremony is held on the 7th of April each year. So again, a very public and visible place. And this visibility is particularly important for the survivor communities in Belgium and France, not least because of the complex post-colonial relations between Rwanda and these two European countries, and the difficulty the latter continue to demonstrate in confronting this difficult past. Belgium, for example, as the former colonial power, was responsible for introducing ethnic identity cards in the 1930s, which were then used in 1994 to identify Tutsi targets during the genocide. Also, the Belgian peacekeepers I mentioned, who were killed at the beginning of the genocide, which, rather than prompting the international community to intervene, led to the withdrawal of the majority of the UN forces. France also had a close relationship with the Rwandan government that was responsible for planning and perpetrating the genocide, and the country played a significant role during the genocide itself, including military training and the implementation of the Opération Turquoise towards the end of the genocide, which was branded as a humanitarian mission, but which enabled members of the genocidal government and other perpetrators to be funneled out of Rwanda and into the DRC. So what I hope this very brief set of examples shows is the importance for the Rwandan community of inscribing the memory of the genocide into the broader memory landscapes of these two countries. Rather than a call for restitution, reparation, or apology, Rwandan diasporic communities are actively seeking the recognition and integration of the Rwandan narrative into European collective memory. As French sociologist Maurice Alvax observes in his influential work on collective memory in the interwar period, our relationship to and knowledge of the past correspond to changing societal needs and to transformations in the structure of society. So our understanding of the past is always instrumental to the solution of present problems, or to return to Radstone's words, to understanding the life of the past in the present. Commemoration in the Rwandan diaspora, then, is developing in response to the urgent need for stronger education and countering genocide negationism and revisionism, which sadly seems to have become increasingly prominent during the COVID pandemic as the visible public commemorations were not able to take place. Rwandan community leaders increasingly stress the educational function of commemoration, using it as a tool to learn from the past and to address the challenges Rwandan communities are still facing in the diaspora. So what is remembered and what is taught in both Belgium and France about Rwanda's colonial past and recent history is therefore of primary importance, both for the Belgian and French youth in order to learn about their country's difficult pasts and their own implication, to use Michael Rothberg's term, in Rwanda's history, and for the Rwandan diaspora to see their experiences reflected and acknowledged in the public sphere. Now, I want to suggest that this ties into broader memory debates currently taking place around decolonising collective memory, for example, incorporating colonial history into the national curriculum and targeting the colonial nostalgia that continues to plague representations of Rwandan colonial and post-colonial history. In a highly problematic yet revealing article, Danielle Delam points to a unique form of nostalgia or mourning for the former Belgian colony, particularly among the older generations and former missionaries, as well as the difficulty Belgians continue to experience in facing what she describes as the stigma placed on the Belgian colonial past in the wake of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. And similarly, in France, there's the example of the Duclerc report that was recently published that recognises, at least to a certain extent, France's responsibility in 1994, but which caused a great deal of controversy in the French media and in public opinion. So Rwandan remembrance and memorialisation therefore plays a crucial role in the ongoing struggle for recognition of Rwandan history, calling for a critical interrogation of both Belgian and French post-colonial relations with Rwanda and their implication in contemporary Rwandan history. In a context where African agency remains largely marginalised in mainstream accounts of Europe's colonial past, I hope this research raises important questions about decolonising collective memory from within the former sites of colonial power and the challenges that the push for increasing visibility on French and Belgian soil poses to dominant historical narratives. So thank you very much, and I look forward to discussing this in the conference on Friday.